The Sunday dinners at Elaine's house started at 4 o'clock, not 4:15, not a quarter to, 4. If you were late, she noticed, and you spent the rest of the meal being reminded of it in small, polite ways. A comment about traffic being bad that day. A question about whether everything was all right. Nothing too sharp, just enough that you knew she'd registered it. I had been going to those dinners for 9 years. I was never late. My name is Nadia Osi. I'm 36 years old. I work in compliance at a regional healthcare network, which is a job most people don't fully understand until they need someone to find the thing that doesn't add up. That's essentially what I do. I look at records, I find what doesn't fit, I follow the paper until I reach the end of it. It's not exciting work from the outside, but I'm good at it, and I've always found a quiet kind of satisfaction in that. That particular Sunday in February, I sat at Elaine's dining table in my usual place. The chair near the window that let in a draft when the temperature dropped, which in February it very much had. Marcus sat at his mother's right hand the way he always did. That was the arrangement, and nobody questioned it. Not Derek, not Jocelyn, and certainly not me. Elaine had made pot roast. There were dinner rolls, a green bean casserole, and the kind of conversation that sounds warm but has a structure to it if you pay attention. Marcus's brother Derek was there with his wife Jocelyn. Derek talked about a commercial project his firm was finishing up in the spring. Jocelyn talked about her daughter's upcoming piano recital. Elaine moved around the table, filling glasses and making sure everyone had what they needed. She always reached me last. I had noticed it for years. I had also stopped mentioning it for years. I didn't make a thing of it. The meal was winding down. Elaine was cutting a second slice of pound cake for Derek when she said, almost like an afterthought, almost like she was commenting on the weather, "I'm just so relieved Marcus finally got the deed. Settled. That whole thing has been hanging over him for months." She said it easily, casually, like it was something everyone at the table already knew. I looked up from my plate. Marcus didn't look at me. He reached for his glass. Derek nodded and said, "Yeah, that process dragged on longer than it should have." Jocelyn smoothed her napkin in her lap. I said, calmly, "What deed?" The table went quiet. Not dramatically, just that specific particular kind of quiet, where everyone becomes very focused on whatever is sitting directly in front of them. Marcus said, without looking at me, "We'll talk about it at home." Elaine smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind she kept ready. "It's not a big deal, Nadia. Just some paperwork." Then she turned back to Derek and asked whether his daughter's team had made the spring playoffs. I sat there. I took a sip of water, I picked up my fork, and I filed that moment away carefully. The way I file everything that doesn't quite fit. Quietly, without fuss, with the full intention of coming back to it later. I didn't say another word about it at dinner, but I didn't forget it either. And what I didn't know yet, sitting in that cold chair near the window while everyone else helped themselves to dessert, was that the deed wasn't the only thing that had been moved, without my knowledge. Not even close. If you've ever sat at a table full of people who all knew something you didn't, and none of them thought it was their job to tell you, drop a comment below. Even just the word same. Because I'd like to know how many of you have been in a room exactly like that one. I need to go back to the beginning, because this won't make sense without knowing what kind of marriage this was, and what kind of family I had married into. I met Marcus Cole 9.5 years ago at a charity fundraiser for a literacy program I volunteered with through work. He was charming in a low-key way. Not showy, not performing, just genuinely easy to be around. He asked thoughtful questions and actually remembered the answers. When he said he'd call, he called. At 26, I thought that was enough to build something on. And for a while, I wasn't wrong. We dated for about 18 months before he proposed. Our wedding was small, 62 people, a Saturday in October, a venue that used to be an old mill. Honest and simple, no performance. I liked that about him. I liked that he didn't seem to need everything to look a certain way. Marcus had been in commercial real estate his entire career. His father started a development firm in the early 90s, built it up steadily, and when he passed away from a stroke about 12 years ago, Marcus and Derek inherited the business. Derek ran the operations side, contractors, timelines, site management. Marcus handled client relationships and finances. From the outside, they were a solid team. We bought the house on Birchwood Lane in our 4th year of marriage. It was a brick colonial with a covered front porch and a backyard that was more lawn than anything else. I contributed 40% of the down payment from money I had saved before we married. That number matters. I want you to hold on to it. At home, Marcus handled most of our financial paperwork. That was an arrangement we'd both agreed to early on. He was in finance professionally. It made sense. I paid our shared credit card from my checking account each month, contributed to our joint savings on a regular schedule, and didn't press him for details about the investment accounts he managed, because he always described them as steady, boring, and growing slowly. His words, not mine. I trusted that. I trusted him. I should have asked more questions. I've thought about that plenty since. But I've also spent a lot of time thinking about the difference between being naive and being deliberately kept in the dark, and I don't want to confuse the two, because they're not the same thing. The problems with Elaine didn't start with any single incident, they accumulated. She introduced me to people the same way for 9 straight years. This is Nadia, Marcus's wife. She works at the hospital. I don't work at the hospital. I work in a downtown office building for a regional healthcare system. I corrected her the first 2 times. After that, I stopped, because the correction was never absorbed, and the effort of repeating it felt worse than just letting it go. Derek was neutral toward me at best. If I said something at dinner, he responded to Marcus as though I hadn't spoken. It wasn't hostile, it was more that I simply wasn't someone whose comments required a direct response. Jocelyn was polite enough, but she and Elaine had a rhythm together, built over years, and I was never included in it. There were birthday dinners I found out about afterward. A long weekend trip Marcus took to visit Elaine's sister. I heard about it 3 days before he left, almost as an aside. When I brought things like that up to Marcus, he had a reliable way of redirecting. You know how my mom is. Derek's just focused on the project. It was a quick trip and you had that conference anyway. And I would sit with it for a day or two and then let it settle, because every time I held on to it, I was the one who ended up feeling difficult, unreasonable. Like I was looking for problems in a family that was simply close in a way mine had never been. That was our pattern for 9 years. But the deed comment was different. I drove us home from Elaine's that Sunday. That was our usual arrangement. I drove because Marcus got sleepy after big meals, and I couldn't ride in the passenger seat for long without feeling carsick. I pulled into the driveway on Birchwood Lane and turned off the engine and sat there for a moment without moving. Tell me about the deed, I said. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose. He looked out the passenger window before he answered. It's a refinancing situation, nothing major. I was going to bring it up when the timing was better. When things were more settled. The rate is better. It saves us money over time. When did this happen? A few months back. It was a process. I looked at him. Was my name on it? He paused. It was brief, maybe a second and a half. But in compliance work, you learn to notice pauses like that. They mean something. A hesitation in the middle of a straightforward answer is not nothing. I handled it, he said. That's not what I asked. He got out of the car. I sat in the driveway alone for a few minutes. The engine was off. The night was cold and still. The kitchen light was on through the window, a timer we'd set in our 2nd year of living there and never once adjusted. I went inside and put the kettle on. Marcus turned on something in the living room. I sat at the kitchen table and let my tea go cold in front of me while I thought through what I knew and what I didn't. About 14 months earlier, Marcus had brought home a document on a Thursday evening. He said it was an administrative form for one of the investment accounts. Something about updated beneficiary information, an insurance review. He'd said something like that. The deadline was Friday morning. He said he'd explain it all properly over the weekend when they weren't rushing. I had been in the middle of a billing compliance audit at work, my brain already stretched thin, and I skimmed the document the way you skim things when you trust the person handing them to you. I signed where he pointed. He took the papers with him when he left for work the next morning. What he didn't know was that I'd made a copy first. Not because I suspected anything. I make copies of everything. It's muscle memory from the job. You keep your own record, always, whether or not anyone asks you to. The copy was sitting in the filing cabinet in the home office, in a folder I'd labeled Missy, Personal, 2023. I hadn't opened that cabinet in about 5 months, but I was starting to think I needed to. I didn't open it that night. I knew myself well enough to know that I needed to be in the right state of mind when I looked at whatever was in there. Not anxious, not already bracing for something. Clear and calm, the way I approach anything at work that might turn out to matter. If I went in while I was already unsettled, I'd read it wrong. So I went to bed. I lay there and listened to Marcus fall asleep beside me, his breathing slow and steady the way it always was. I stared at the ceiling. I thought about 3 things. A deed settled. Months of paperwork. A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. I lay very still and I thought, something is off. Not loudly. Not in a panicked, spinning way. In the quiet, certain way I recognize from work. When you're 2 hours into a file, and you haven't found the discrepancy yet. But you already know it's in there. You can feel the outline of it before you see it clearly. I was going to find it. I always do. I waited until Monday morning. Marcus left for work at 7:45, the same as every weekday. I heard the garage door close, waited another 5 minutes in case he came back for something he'd forgotten, and then I went to the home office. The filing cabinet was gray steel, 2 drawers, nothing special. I'd bought it myself 6 years ago when we moved from the apartment into the house on Birchwood Lane, because I needed somewhere to keep documents that mattered. Marcus had his own cabinet for work files. We never shared them. That arrangement had always seemed practical. Now I was starting to think about it differently. I unlocked my cabinet and pulled out the folder labeled Missy. Personal 2023. There were only 3 things inside. A letter from our insurance company about a policy renewal, a receipt from a home repair we'd had done in October, and the copy I'd made of the document Marcus brought home that Thursday in November. I set the other 2 aside and smoothed the copy flat on the desk. I read it once, quickly, then I read it again slowly. It wasn't an insurance form. It wasn't anything close to an insurance form. The document was a signature authorization form tied to our joint investment account at Meridian Wealth Partners. The language on it granted Marcus the authority to act as the sole authorized signatory on that account, meaning he could make withdrawals, transfers, and investment decisions without requiring my signature or approval going forward. There was a checkbox at the bottom. It had been checked. My signature was on the line directly below it. I sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then I pulled out a legal pad and started writing down everything I remembered. The date he'd brought the form home, what he'd said it was for, the exact words he'd used. Insurance review. Beneficiary update. Sign here, it's just administrative. I wrote it all down the way I've been trained to document things at work. Dates in the left margin. Details in full sentences. Nothing left vague. That's what compliance work does to you after enough years. You stop accepting summaries. You go to the source document. You check whether what someone told you matches what's actually written. In this case, it did not match, not even close. I want to tell you about something that happened about 16 months before that Sunday dinner, because there's a detail in it that matters. Elaine had called a family meeting. She called them occasionally, usually when there was something involving the business or shared finances that she wanted everyone on the same page about. I had attended most of them over the years. I use the word attended loosely. My presence at those meetings was largely decorative. I sat, I listened, and I was not asked for input. That particular meeting was about a piece of commercial property the family owned together. A small office building on Tanner Street that had been part of Marcus's father's original portfolio. A developer had approached them with a purchase offer. Elaine wanted to discuss whether to sell. The meeting was at her house on a Wednesday evening. Marcus and I drove over together. Derek was already there with folders spread in front of him on the dining table. Elaine walked everyone through the offer. Derek asked about the developer's timeline. Marcus asked about the tax implications of selling in that calendar year. They went back and forth for about 30 minutes. At one point, I said, "Have you looked at what comparable properties have sold for in that corridor recently?" There were 2 transactions on adjacent streets in the last 18 months. The numbers might give you a stronger negotiation position. Elaine looked at me with the expression she reserved for comments she didn't quite know what to do with. Then she looked at Marcus. Then she said, "We'll have our accountant look at all of that." Derek moved on. Nobody acknowledged what I'd said. Nobody disagreed with it either. It was simply set aside, the way you set aside something that came from the wrong place. In the car afterward, I mentioned it to Marcus. He said, "They know what they're doing with the business stuff." I said I wasn't suggesting they didn't. I was trying to be useful. He said, "I know." And that was the end of it. What I found out later was that the 2 comparable transactions I'd referenced ended up cited in the family's counteroffer. Identical data points. Their accountant's letterhead, not mine. They didn't need me in the room. They just needed what I could contribute laundered through someone they already respected. I filed that away. I file everything. Back to Monday morning. After I finished the notes on my legal pad, I went to my laptop and logged into the credit monitoring service I'd kept for years. I checked it maybe twice annually, usually around tax time. I hadn't looked since the previous April. I entered my credentials and waited for the dashboard to load. The score had dropped 61 points since my last visit. I stared at that number for a moment. Then I clicked into the details. There was a personal loan in my name, opened 11 months ago. The lender was a finance company called Hartwell Capital Solutions. The loan amount was $47,000. I had made 0 payments on it according to the report, which meant it had been flagged as delinquent for several months running. I had never heard of Hartwell Capital Solutions. I had never applied for a personal loan. I had never seen that name on any document I'd knowingly signed. I printed the credit report, all 14 pages. Then I sat at the desk and didn't move for a few minutes. I'm not going to overdramatize what that felt like, because I think you already know. It's a cold, clarifying feeling, the kind that wipes out everything else and leaves only the most necessary thoughts. What I felt wasn't panic. It was something closer to, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. Now I can start working. I thought about Marcus. I thought about the pause in the car Sunday night, that 1 second too long before he said I handled it. I thought about Elaine's easy smile when she said just some paperwork. And I thought about the document I'd signed in 45 seconds because I was tired and I trusted my husband. I closed the laptop and called Renata. Renata and I had worked together for 3 years before she moved to a different organization. She was a compliance officer with a sharper instinct for financial fraud than almost anyone I'd known professionally, and she had the kind of steadiness that doesn't crack under pressure. We'd been through difficult audits together, the kind where you find something serious and have to decide carefully how to proceed. She understood what it meant to hold information without reacting too fast. I told her what I had, not every detail, just the key pieces: the deed, the authorization form, the credit report, the loan I'd never taken out. She was quiet for a few seconds after I finished. Do you have copies of everything? I have the authorization form. I just printed the credit report. Okay. Don't touch anything in your joint accounts. Don't move money, don't close anything, don't do anything that looks like preparation. Not yet. I know. Pull your full credit file from all 3 bureaus directly, not just the monitoring summary. And Nadia. A pause. Don't tell him you know. I wasn't planning to. Good. Because once he knows you know, the clock changes. I understood exactly what she meant. In any investigation, the moment the subject realizes they're being examined is the moment documents start disappearing. I had worked through enough messy audit situations to know how quickly a paper trail goes cold once someone with motivation starts cleaning it up. After I hung up, I went back to the filing cabinet and pulled everything I had. Tax returns going back 6 years. The original mortgage documents from when we bought the house. Both names, both signatures. My 40% contribution clearly documented in the closing disclosure. Bank statements from our joint account covering the past 2 years. I spread it all on the desk and started going through it the way I go through anything at work. Line by line. The mortgage paperwork was clean. Everything in order from 4 years ago. I set that aside. The bank statements were where things got interesting. Beginning about 22 months before that Sunday dinner, there was a recurring transfer leaving our joint account every month. Varying amounts, sometimes $1,800, sometimes $2,200, once as high as $2,900. Always to the same destination account. The memo field was blank every single time. I counted them. 19 transfers over 22 months. I added them up on a fresh page of the legal pad. $38,400. Gone from our joint account. Quietly. Over the course of less than 2 years. I sat with that number for a long moment. Then I remembered something Marcus had mentioned about 6 months ago, casually, over dinner. He'd said the investment accounts had taken a hit from market volatility, that we'd probably see things level back out by mid-year. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Market fluctuation was real, and his tone had been calm and matter-of-fact, the way it always was. But the market doesn't generate 19 identical outgoing transfers from a joint checking account in 19 consecutive months. Someone made a decision to move that money, and someone had made sure I wouldn't notice until it was already long gone. I closed the folder and sat very still. Marcus would be home by 6:30. I had about 7 hours. I didn't waste a single one. That Monday I stayed home from work. I called in and said I had a personal matter to deal with, which was the most accurate thing I had said in days. My manager said to take what I needed. I thanked her and got back to work. The first thing I did was request my full credit files from all 3 bureaus directly. Not through the monitoring service, but through the official federal request process. 2 of them I could pull online immediately. The third required a mailed request, which I sent from a FedEx store 2 blocks from the house, so there was no record of it going out from our home address. Small habit. Something about it felt right. The online files came through within the hour. The Hartwell Capital Solutions loan appeared on all 3, opened 11 months ago, $47,000. 6 months delinquent. The address on the application matched Birchwood Lane. The contact phone number listed was not one I recognized. I wrote down every account number, every date, every lender name. Then I called the county recorder's office. I've dealt with county public records enough times through work that I know how these calls go. You give them a property address, they look it up in the index, they tell you what's recorded. It takes about 3 minutes. I gave the address on Birchwood Lane. The woman typed it in. I heard the keys. Most recent recording on that property, she said, is a quitclaim deed. Recorded about 9 months ago, February of last year. I kept my voice even. Can you tell me the names on that deed? More typing. Grantor is listed as Nadia Ose Cole. Grantee is Marcus A. Cole. I wrote it down. And what does that mean in terms of current title? It means the grantor transferred their interest in the property to the grantee, she said. So as of the recording date, the property would be held solely by the grantee. Thank you, I said. That's very helpful. I hung up. I put the pen down on the legal pad and looked at what I had just written. Grantor, Nadia Ose Cole. According to the public record, I had signed a quitclaim deed transferring my ownership interest in the house on Birchwood Lane entirely to Marcus. 9 months ago. I had never signed a quitclaim deed. I had never been presented with one. I had never agreed to give up my share of a property I had contributed 40% of the down payment on and lived in for 4 years. But the county recorder's office had a document that said otherwise. I sat at the desk for a long time. I thought about the authorization form I'd signed 14 months ago. The one Marcus said was for an insurance review. I thought about whether a quitclaim deed could be folded into a stack of papers and handed to someone distracted and tired and trusting without them realizing what they were actually signing. I thought about whether the signature on that recorded deed was mine, or whether it had been placed there by someone who had 9 years of access to my handwriting. I thought about all of it, and then I stopped thinking and started doing, because thinking without a next step wasn't going to help me. I texted Renata. Just 3 words, can you talk? She called back in 4 minutes. I told her what the recorder's office had said. She was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she said, "You need an attorney. Not next week. This week." I know. Someone who specifically handles real estate and marital asset disputes. Not a general practice person. A pause. I have a name, Carol Voss. She has an office on Delmar Avenue. She handled a complicated property fraud case for my cousin 2 years ago, and she was good. I'll text you the number. I wrote the name down before the text came through. Then I asked the question that had been sitting at the edge of everything since that morning. If the signature on the quitclaim deed is forged, how hard is it to prove? Depends on what you compare it against, she said. If you have legitimate signed documents from around the same period, a forensic document examiner can work with those. Forgeries are usually detectable. The pressure is different, the letter formation, small things that are hard to replicate exactly. She paused. Do you have anything like that? I looked at the stack on the desk. The closing disclosure from when we bought the house. My signature was on 6 pages of it. Yes, I said. Good. Keep it somewhere only you can access. After the call, I drove back to the FedEx store and made clean copies of everything. The authorization form, the printed credit reports, the bank statements, the original mortgage documents, my handwritten notes, 2 full sets. I kept one in a plain navy folder I bought at the drugstore. The second set went into a waterproof zip bag that I drove to Renata's house, where she took it without a word and locked it in her home office. Before I left the FedEx parking lot, I called Meridian Wealth Partners. I had the account number from the authorization form Marcus had me sign 14 months ago. I told the representative I was calling to verify the current balance on the joint investment account. She pulled it up. The balance was $11,200. I thanked her and hung up. The last time Marcus had mentioned that account, about 8 months prior, when he said markets had been rough, he'd described the balance as being around $90,000. I'd felt reassured by that number. I remembered exactly because I'd been relieved. $11,200. I sat in the parking lot for about 2 minutes. Then I drove home. There was one more thing I needed to check before he got back. Marcus's desk had a lock on it. Always had. He kept client contracts in there, project bids, things that were confidential for business reasons. That had always seemed reasonable to me. It seemed like something else now. I didn't have the key. It was on his key ring, which was with him. I went to the kitchen and got a butter knife and a small flathead screwdriver from the junk drawer. The lock was a standard cheap cabinet lock, and it took me about 4 minutes. 4 minutes longer than it should have, but I got there. Inside the top drawer, a folder from Hartwell Capital Solutions. Not a loan statement, an application. My name at the top, Marcus's handwriting in the fields below, our home address. My social security number, which he'd known for 9 years from our joint tax returns. The signature at the bottom had the general shape of mine, but it was not mine. I have signed my name on thousands of compliance documents over more than a decade. I know exactly where my capital N curves, where the O in OC widens slightly at the base. This was a careful imitation. But it was an imitation. I photographed every page with my phone. 12 photos. Then I closed the folder exactly as I'd found it, placed it back in the drawer, and relocked the desk. I sat on the edge of our bed and looked at the photos on my screen. Marcus had filed a fraudulent loan application in my name. He had, in all likelihood, forged my signature on a county deed transferring our shared home into his name alone. He had moved nearly $40,000 out of our joint account over less than 2 years. He had quietly drained a joint investment account from somewhere near $90,000 down to 11. He had taken an authorization form for that account out of my hands 14 months ago, and I had signed it in 45 seconds because I was tired and I trusted him. The scope of it didn't make me want to scream or break something. It made me feel precise. That's the only word I have for it. Like something inside me had narrowed down to a single clear point and was holding very steady there. I was not going to ruin this by moving too fast. That was the one thing I kept reminding myself. You do not blow a 9-year case by reacting before you're ready. Marcus came home at 6:28. I heard his key in the lock, heard him drop his bag, heard him call my name from the hallway. A habit, easy and automatic. In here, I called from the kitchen. I had made dinner. Pasta, a simple tomato sauce, a green salad. I had set the table the same way I always did, 2 placemats, 2 glasses of water, napkins folded flat. He came in, looked at the table, said, "This smells good," washed his hands at the sink, and we sat down together and ate. He asked how my day was. I said it was quiet. I asked about his. He talked about a client call that ran long, something about a revised project timeline on a development near the river. He seemed relaxed, easy. He refilled his water glass halfway through the meal and made a small comment about the forecast turning colder by the weekend. I listened. I nodded at the right moments. I asked one follow-up question about the project, which made him talk for another few minutes, which meant the quiet between us never stretched long enough to feel wrong. I thought about the Navy folder sitting in my car, locked in the trunk. I thought about Carol Voss on Delmar Avenue. I thought about my name in the county recorder's public index, on a deed I had never agreed to sign. He had no idea. He sat across from me eating the dinner I made, and he had absolutely no idea. That didn't make me feel strong. It made me feel the full weight of what I was going to have to do, very clearly and all at once. After dinner, Marcus offered to do the dishes. I let him. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and watched him move around the kitchen the way he had for 9 years, unhurried, like a man with a clean conscience. I made the appointment with Carol Voss on my phone while his back was turned. 8:30 Thursday morning. She'd had a cancellation. Renata had already called ahead. I put the phone face down on the table and finished my tea. I had 3 days. I wasn't going to waste a single one. Carol Voss's office was on the 3rd floor of a building on Delmar Avenue, between a tax preparation service and a small law library. Plain, organized, no effort wasted on impressing anyone. She was in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a lanyard and a way of listening that made you feel like every word was being catalogued precisely. I liked her immediately. I laid everything on her desk in the order I'd assembled it. The copy of the authorization form, the printed credit reports, the bank statements with 19 transfers highlighted in yellow, the original mortgage closing documents with my genuine signatures on 6 pages, the photos from Marcus's desk drawer showing the Hartwell Capital Solutions application, my handwritten notes, dated and detailed. She read through all of it without interrupting. When she finished, she took her glasses off. "The quitclaim deed is the central issue," she said. "If that signature was forged, everything else builds cleanly around it. The loan application, the unauthorized transfers, they establish a pattern. But the deed is already in the public record, which means it's documented without you having to prove anything was hidden." She worked regularly with a forensic document examiner named Dr. Patricia Gaines. Carol could send a copy of the recorded deed alongside my genuine signatures from the mortgage closing documents for a preliminary comparison. Dr. Gaines could usually give a preliminary read within 48 hours. "If they're not consistent," I asked. "Then you have evidence of forgery on a property deed," Carol said. "That's not just a civil matter, that's criminal, which changes your negotiating position considerably." She pulled up the Hartwell application photos on her screen and compared the signature to one of my genuine ones from the mortgage documents. "I'm not the expert," she said, "but look at the N, yours lifts at the start. This one drags flat." She turned the screen toward me. She was right, I'd noticed the same thing in Renata's kitchen. Again, that's not my professional determination. but it supports your account. She also looked at the bank transfer records. She traced the destination account number through a legal financial database she had access to. It took her about 6 minutes. She looked up. These transfers went to an LLC registered 18 months ago. The LLC is called Eastgate Property Group. She set the paper down. Marcus A. Cole is listed as the managing member. Derek J. Cole is listed as co-member. I sat with that for a moment. So the family business, I said. The transfers appear to have funded it, yes. I authorized her to proceed. Preliminary forensic comparison, formal legal notice to Marcus, and a dispute letter to Hartwell Capital Solutions. The notice to Marcus would go out Friday morning by certified mail and to his professional email address, both, so there was no question of receipt. What happens when he gets it? I asked. He'll call me, or he'll find his own attorney, she said. Either way, he'll know you know, and he'll know you have representation. She looked at me steadily. Are you ready for that? I've been ready since Monday, I said. The certified notice went out Friday morning. Carol's office sent me a confirmation email at 9:43. Marcus came home Friday at his usual time. He heated up leftovers and watched something in the living room. I sat at the kitchen table with a book I wasn't actually reading and listened to the ordinary sounds of the house. He said goodnight around 10:30. I said goodnight back. Saturday afternoon his phone rang while he was in the home office. I heard his voice shift from behind the closed door. Not the words, just the register. Lower, more careful, the way people speak when they're trying to control something. He was on the call for 11 minutes. When he came out, he stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at me for a moment before speaking. The ease was gone. The version of himself he usually carried through the house wasn't there anymore. You got a lawyer, he said. I did. He came further into the kitchen. Nadia, I can explain the refinancing, the deed, I was going to tell you. I needed to restructure things for the business, and it was temporary, I never meant. I don't want to do this tonight, I said. My voice was steady. I'm not in the right place to have this conversation tonight. He stopped. He stood there and I could see him weighing it. Whether to push through, whether to apologize, whether to try to explain further. He chose none of them. He went back to the office and shut the door. I stayed at the kitchen table for a while longer. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept. Elaine's Sunday dinner had been standing on the calendar for weeks. 4 o'clock. The same invitation it always was. I thought about not going. Then I remembered something Carol had said Thursday. That witnesses to Marcus's awareness of the situation, to the family's responses in real time, could matter later. That how people behaved when documentation was present said something about what they knew and when they knew it. So I went. I drove separately for the first time since I'd married into that family. I told Marcus I had something to take care of first. He didn't ask what. I arrived at 4 exactly. His car was already in the driveway. Derek's too. Inside, the table was set the way it always was. Pot roast, green bean casserole, rolls in a basket. Elaine moved through the kitchen with her usual smooth efficiency. She hugged me at the door. I let her. We sat. Marcus at his mother's right hand. Me in the chair near the window. Derek and Jocelyn across from us. The food was passed and the conversation started the way it always started. Derek on a project, Jocelyn on her daughter's schedule. Elaine filling glasses and managing the temperature of the room. She did not ask me a single question. Marcus was performing relaxed. The movements were right, the timing was close. But I had sat across from that man for 9 years. I knew the difference between ease and the imitation of ease. This was the imitation. Elaine knew something was off too. I could see her reading the table, making small corrections, steering the conversation whenever it neared an edge. She was good at it. She'd had a long time to practice. We were halfway through the meal when she said, pleasantly, I know things have been a bit stressful lately between the business and everything, but these things have a way of working themselves out within a family. She looked around the table with her practiced warmth. That's what family is for. I looked at her. I reached into the bag beside my chair. I took out a single sheet of paper, a copy of Carol's formal legal notice, and set it on the table next to my plate. Elaine's eyes went to it immediately. So did Derek's. What is that? Elaine asked. A letter from my attorney, I said. It outlines what I found this past week, the quitclaim deed recorded 9 months ago that removed my name from our home. The personal loan opened in my name at Hartwell Capital Solutions that I never applied for. The authorization form Marcus misrepresented to me 14 months ago. $38,400 transferred from our joint account over 22 months into an LLC that Derek is also listed on. I paused. And the preliminary forensic finding that the signature on the quitclaim deed is not consistent with my genuine signature. The table was completely still. Jocelyn had set her fork down. She was looking at Derek. Derek was looking at Marcus, not at me. That told me exactly what I needed to know about how much he already understood. Elaine's composure held a few seconds longer than everyone else's. Then she said carefully, "Nadia, I think this is something you and Marcus need to work through privately. This really isn't the place." I looked at her. "You said something similar 2 weeks ago at this same table. You called it just some paperwork." My voice stayed even. "It wasn't some paperwork. And it's not a private matter anymore," Marcus said quietly. "Nadia, please." I wasn't looking at him, I was looking at Elaine. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone," I said. "I'm here because you were all in this room when you assumed I didn't know. I thought you should be in this room when you find out that I do." Derek shifted in his seat and looked at Marcus. Something passed between them. The particular brief look of two people who have had a private conversation that is now becoming a public one. I noted it. I noted it carefully and completely. I stood up. I left the copy of the letter on the table. I picked up my bag. "You don't have to go," Elaine said. Her voice had changed. The warmth was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. I was already moving toward the door. My steps were even. My hands were still. I didn't look back. The last thing I saw before I stepped outside was Derek leaning toward Marcus across the table, voice low, and Marcus sitting very still, staring at the sheet of paper I had left behind as though he was trying to decide what it meant for him. I got into my car and sat with both hands on the wheel for a moment. Then I drove to Renata's house. I had a folder in the trunk, a conversation to finish, and a new chapter to figure out how to start, Dr. Gaines's preliminary report came back on a Tuesday, 11 days after the meeting on Delmar Avenue. Carol called me at 8:52 in the morning. I was at my desk, reviewing a billing audit I'd been putting off for 2 weeks, and I stepped into the hallway to take the call. "The comparison is clear," she said. "The signature on the quitclaim deed is not consistent with your genuine signatures on the mortgage closing documents." Dr. Gaines rates her confidence as high. She's prepared to provide a formal written report and, if necessary, expert testimony. I leaned against the wall and looked at the carpet. "Okay," I said. "I've forwarded the preliminary findings to Marcus's attorney this morning. They've gone quiet since, which typically means they're reassessing their position." "What does that mean practically?" "It means he very likely won't contest the divorce," Carol said. "A forgery finding attached to your name in open court is not something most people want to survive. His attorney will recommend settlement." "And the Hartwell loan?" "The dispute letter went to Hartwell last week. The credit bureaus have been notified. These things take a few months, but you have strong grounds. The application has Marcus's handwriting in every field and a signature that won't survive comparison. They'll cut their losses eventually." I thanked her and went back to my desk and sat for a moment before reopening the audit file. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like, not triumph. Just the quiet sensation of something moving in the right direction after a long time moving the wrong way. Marcus's attorney sent Carol a settlement proposal 9 days later. I won't walk through every detail, because some of it is still closed, but the shape of it was this. The quitclaim deed was voided through a corrective deed filed with the county recorder, which restored my name to the title. As part of the divorce settlement, I received my 40% equity share of the home's appraised value, plus a portion of the assets that had moved through the Eastgate Property Group LLC over those 22 months. Marcus did not contest. The process moved through the system the way these things do when both sides understand that open proceedings are worse for one party than the other. I did not stay in the house on Birchwood Lane. I didn't want to. Whatever I'd built there felt like it belonged to a version of my life I was no longer living, and I didn't see the point in trying to preserve the walls around something that had already gone hollow. I stayed at Renata's for 3 weeks. Then I found a 2-bedroom apartment on a street called Caldwell Row, about 4 miles from work. Second floor, good natural light, a kitchen with more cabinet space than I'd had in years. I signed the lease myself. I wrote the check from my own account. That felt like something. Not dramatic, just solid. Like setting both feet on ground that actually held. The fallout within the family was gradual, which is how it usually goes with people who've spent years managing appearances. Elaine called 6 times in the 2 weeks after the Sunday dinner. I answered once, about 10 days in, because I thought it was fair to give her one conversation. She said she hadn't known the full extent of what Marcus had done. She said she knew the deed was being handled, but thought it was a routine restructuring. She said the family had been under financial pressure from a development project that didn't perform as expected, and Marcus told her he had a plan. She said she was sorry things had gone this far. I listened to all of it. Then I said, I believe you didn't know every detail. But you knew enough to sit at that table and call it just some paperwork. And that's where it stopped being something I can set aside. She was quiet for a moment, then she said she hoped we could find a way through this eventually. Maybe, I said. But not right now. I haven't spoken to her since. Derek I never heard from directly. His name appeared in the legal correspondence regarding the LLC, and from what Carol told me, he cooperated with the settlement process to limit his own exposure. The transfers were repaid into the marital estate as part of the final agreement. What happened to the family business after that is not something I followed. It wasn't my concern anymore. About a month after the Sunday dinner, Jocelyn sent me a text. It was short, it said, I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner. I didn't know exactly what I was watching, but I think I knew something was wrong. I hope you're okay. I read it twice. I waited a few days before writing back. I said, thank you. I'm okay. I meant it. That was the only message I received from anyone in that family that felt like it came from an honest place. I've thought about that more than once. The Hartwell loan came off my credit report 4 months after the dispute was filed. The claim was upheld. All 3 bureaus updated their records. When the monitoring service notified me, I pulled the report and looked at the score. It had recovered most of what it had lost, and with time it would finish the rest. I kept the navy blue folder for a while after everything settled. It sat on the shelf in my home office on Caldwell Row, worn a little at the corners from being carried in and out of bags and car trunks and attorney waiting rooms. I'd look at it sometimes when I walked past, not with any strong feeling, just awareness. That folder was where things had started to turn. About 6 months after I moved in, I went through it one final time. I checked that all the digital copies were backed up in 3 separate places, the way Renata had insisted from the beginning. Then I put the paper copies in a filing box for the hall closet. The folder I put in the recycling bin. I stood in the kitchen afterward and made tea and thought about what the past year had cost me and what it had given back. What it cost. 9 years of a life I thought I understood. A house I'd helped build. A version of the future I had counted on without examining closely enough. Trust I gave freely to someone who treated it as a resource rather than a gift. What it gave back. Clarity. The particular kind that only comes when the thing you were quietly protecting turns out not to have needed your protection at all. It was taking from you. The whole time it was just taking. I had spent 9 years in a family that saw me as decorative, as background, as someone whose observations didn't require acknowledgement, whose contributions could be useful if routed through a more acceptable source, whose name had value they could access even when she herself did not. They had never asked who I was because they had already decided. And for 9 years I had let the decision stand, rather than force the question. I had mistaken being included for being seen, and I had mistaken being seen for being safe. I'm back at work full-time. The billing audit I'd let sit for 2 weeks got finished, and my manager Donna said it was one of the cleaner ones we'd had in a quarter. I didn't tell her what had been going on. She didn't need to know why I'd been distracted. She just needed the work done right. And I did it right, the way I always have. That part of me was never in question. Not really. Renata and I have lunch most Thursdays. She never says I told you so because she's not that kind of person. She just looks at me sometimes across the table in that small, steady way she has, and I know what it means. It means, you handled it. It means I knew you would. My mother called a few weeks after the divorce was finalized. I gave her the short version. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said something she used to say when I was young, and things had gone wrong in ways I didn't fully understand yet. She said, the truth doesn't need you to carry it. It carries itself. She was right. The truth was already there when I started looking. It was in the county recorder's public index. It was in the bank statements. It was in Dr. Gaines's report and in the signature on that quitclaim deed that someone had carefully copied but couldn't quite get right. Because that's the thing about forgeries. They can get close, but they can't get all the way there. There's always a detail, a pressure point, a letter that curves the wrong way. All I did was look. I live alone now on Caldwell Row. The apartment is quiet in the mornings, which took some getting used to, and now I don't want it any other way. I make coffee and sit at the kitchen table and look out the window at the street below before I start the day. I'm not finished figuring out what comes next. I don't think you ever are. But whatever comes next, it won't be built on something hidden. It won't be built around a name someone is using without asking, or a chair near a drafty window at a table where someone reaches me last. It won't be a life I have to audit to find out who I actually am inside it. Whatever it is, it's mine. Just mine. And right now, that's exactly enough.